Greetings and welcome to a story shrouded in chaos, betrayal, and unthinkable loss. Today we delve into the harrowing night of March the 2nd, 1943, when a Japanese convoy sailing towards New Guinea was ambushed in the most brutal way imaginable. But what if I told you that behind this devastating attack lies a web of secret codes, advanced warfare techniques, and a deadly game of intelligence that nearly changed the course of history? Imagine a trembling Japanese officer clutching the wreckage of his ship's bridge, oil-stained and haunted by what he's witnessed. How did a fleet of 8 transport ships, carrying nearly 7,000 soldiers, become sitting ducks in the vast, treacherous waters of the Bismarck Sea? Could the Allies' seemingly flawless intelligence system have predicted every move, every route? Were the innovative skip-bombing techniques developed by nations as far apart as Italy and Australia the key to unleashing destruction from the skies? And what was the true purpose behind the massive aerial assault? An effort to wipe out an entire convoy or something more clandestine? From the meticulously planned departure from Simpson Harbor to the deadly skies filled with B-25 Mitchells armed with revolutionary skip bombs, every element of this operation was fraught with peril. As a squadron of 29 B-17 Flying Fortresses suddenly appeared overhead, unleashing chaos and destruction, did the Japanese soldiers truly understand the extent of the enemy's intelligence? Decrypted messages, intercepted communications, and a carefully orchestrated trap. The central question remains, how could a seemingly well-guarded convoy of thousands of men and ships be so thoroughly exposed, ambushed, and shattered in moments? What secrets did the Allies hold that allowed them to strike with such precision? And what truths still lie buried beneath layers of deception and wartime propaganda? In this video, we will follow every step of this perilous journey, peel back the layers of intelligence and innovation, and reveal the shocking reality behind one of the most brutal naval and aerial battles of the Second World War. Prepare yourself. What you are about to learn may forever change what you thought you knew about courage, deception, and the true cost of war. The story begins now. On the morning of March the 3rd in the year 1943, at precisely 10:15 hours, an encounter of grim consequence unfolded in the barren waters of the Bismarck Sea, located approximately 30 nautical miles northwest of Lille, a remote point on the coast of New Guinea. The scene was marked by chaos and destruction, where the oil-stained hand of a Japanese naval officer, visibly trembling, clenched tightly around the fragmented remnants of what had once been a vital part of the bridge structure of the destroyer Oresio. His uniform, saturated with crude fuel oil and salty seawater, bore the weight of the fierce conflict in which he was embroiled, these physical stains serving as a haunting record of the horrors he had witnessed and the memories that would soon linger with him long after that fateful day. Through eyes burnt red and streaked with salt and smoke, he observed a terrible spectacle. American B-25 Mitchell bombers, cutting sharply through the air, circling eerily above a sprawling debris field that had spread across miles of turbulent sea. The airspace was thick with acrid smoke, billowing flames from wrecked ships, and slick patches of oil flashing agonizingly in the sunlight. Beneath the swirling chaos, thousands of men clung desperately to any floating object they could find, seeking respite from the relentless violence around them. The convoy that once sailed with unwavering confidence from the port of Rabaul just 2 days earlier now lay in ruin, reduced to a scattered collection of wreckage and despair. Nothing more than a sprawling, shattered no-man's land amidst the tumultuous waters. And those remaining survivors were to learn painfully that their nightmare was far from reaching its conclusion. In total, approximately 6,900 soldiers, including elite divisions of the Imperial Japanese Army's 51st Division, had embarked on an ambitious journey aboard 8 transport ships from Simpson Harbor, located at Rabaul on the 28th of February. Their mission had been to reinforce the Japanese stronghold of Leh in hopes of turning the tide in New Guinea and gaining ground against advancing Allied forces. What awaited them instead, however, was an example of warfare's brutal reality that would shatter every preconceived notion they had. Destroyed illusions about honor among enemies, along with every illusion cultivated by persistent Japanese propaganda that painted American soldiers as highly disciplined and courteous adversaries. The course of that ill-fated operation would cast long, torturous shadows for the survivors, who would quickly realize that the struggles they faced were far from over, and that their ordeal in these unforgiving waters was only intensifying. Planning for this daring and perilous convoy had commenced in late December of 1942, under the shadowed corridors of the Imperial General Headquarters situated in Tokyo. In command of the operation was Lieutenant General Hoshi Imamura, who led the 8th Area Army at Rabaul and was grappling with an increasingly dire situation unfolding in the brooding expanse of New Guinea. The convoy itself was commissioned as a strategic effort by the Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo, a deliberate reinforcement meant to bolster Japanese positions deep within the Southwest Pacific Theater. Significantly, it involved a carefully coordinated fleet comprising 8 destroyers, providing escort to 8 transport ships laden with the specialized, highly trained troops of the 51st Division, freshly transferred from mainland China. The voyage became a test of both naval coordination and endurance. On the 28th day of February, 1943, these vessels set sail from Simpson Harbor in Rabaul, guarded by a formidable aerial escort. A squadron of roughly 100 fighter aircraft accompanied their journey, with Rear Admiral Masatami Kimura, commanding from the proud destroyer Shirayuki, flying his flag high amidst the glittering fleet. Kimura was a seasoned veteran, with years of experience successfully executing convoy operations in the past, yet he was acutely aware of the dangers that lurked in such missions. Intelligence gathered from their wargame simulations indicated that this expedition carried considerable risks. Estimations suggested that roughly 4 out of every 10 transports could be lost to enemy action, along with as many as 30 to 40 enemy aircraft. The operation was thus regarded with cautious optimism, with a declared success rate of only 50-50, revealing the perilous uncertainty shrouding the mission. As the convoy traversed the northern coastline of New Britain on March the 1st, the first warning of incoming danger arrived in the form of a reconnaissance aircraft, a B-24 Liberator from the formidable 91st Bombardment Group, appearing suddenly on radar screens and in the sky. What the Japanese convoy did not yet comprehend was that their precise movements had been meticulously tracked and predicted by Allied forces in advance. Thanks to AES-058 communications intelligence and ciphers decrypted decades earlier, Allied cryptographers stationed in Melbourne, in Fleet Radio Unit Melbourne, along with those operating from Washington, D.C., had intercepted and decoded vital enemy messages, revealing the convoy's planned route, destination, and operational date, an intelligence treasure that gave the Allies a potentially decisive upper hand. At 6th Air Force Headquarters, the development of a highly effective bombing technique during World War II was rooted in the innovative efforts of multiple nations involved in the conflict. Countries such as Italy, Australia, Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States independently forged this method, which proved to be a pivotal tactic in naval and aerial warfare. This technique involves an aircraft releasing a bomb in a manner that causes it to skip across the surface of the water, similar to how a stone skips when thrown across a pond's surface. Such a method enabled pilots to strike targets on the water with precision, even at relatively close ranges, by bouncing the explosive across the waves so that it would either bounce into the sides of ships or explode at very close proximity, causing maximum damage. One notable military innovator in this field was Major Paul "Pappy" Gunn, who reconfigured B-25 Mitchell bombers into specialized skip bombers. These aircraft were upgraded with the addition of up to 8 forward-firing machine guns, caliber .50, mounted in their noses. When combined with the skip bombing techniques, these modified aircraft transformed into formidable flying gunships capable of unleashing rapid destructive firepower. Their ability to quickly and accurately target ships at sea made them especially dangerous within low-altitude attack scenarios, where traditional bombing strategies might have been less effective. The dawn of March the 2nd dawned bleak and gray, with a heavy overcast sky cloaking the sea in diffused twilight. However, at 10 o'clock in the morning, the weather suddenly cleared, and the clouds parted, unveiling a fleet of 29 B-17 Flying Fortress aircraft approaching from the high altitudes. As this formidable force descended upon a convoy, chaos immediately broke loose. The attack was swift and devastating. A large merchant vessel was immediately sunk, while two other ships sustained critical damage. Amid this chaos, a destroyer attempted to muster rescue efforts, trying to save survivors from the water. In its hastily launched rescue operation, oil-slicked men were pulled from the sea, actions driven by compassion but with inherent tactical risk. Reducing your speed in such a rescue operation, however, rendered the ship more vulnerable. By the morning of March the 3rd, the weather had decisively cleared, providing ideal flying conditions once again. The convoy, now significantly diminished, comprising only 7 transport vessels and 8 destroyers, had already traversed nearly 2/3 of its journey to Leh, a crucial strategic point. Nevertheless, at exactly 10 o'clock, the 5 o'clock shadow of death abruptly descended from multiple directions. All the seasoned plans of the Japanese ensnared in the campaign began to unravel suddenly in an hour that would prove disastrous for them. Within a mere 15 minutes, the Japanese forces faced profound loss in what would become a decisive turning point of World War II, near the Bismarck Sea, just off the coast of New Guinea at Leh. The initial assault commenced with high-altitude B-17 bombers, which attracted attention from Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft guns alike, engaging their defenses skyward. As the defenders' focus was directed upward in an effort to shoot down the American aircraft, elements of the Australian Air Force, specifically 13 swift bow fighters, seized the opportunity. These fighters swooped in at mast height, their 8 forward-firing guns shredding decks as they swept past. Behind these maritime Luftwaffe-turned predators, something far more daring was approaching, a formation of modified B-25 Mitchell bombers, flying so low that their prop wash etched turbulence and gouges into the ocean surface. The technique of skip bombing proved to be devastatingly lethal in this combat scenario. Instead of dropping bombs from altitude like traditional methods, the B-25s released their ordnance at wave height, causing the bombs to bounce across the water's surface in a manner reminiscent of a stone skipping on a pond. This caused the bombs either to ricochet into a ship's hull and detonate, or to submerge momentarily before exploding in close proximity to the vessel's sides. Among the pilots executing this daring strafing assault was Captain Ed Lana, leader of the 90th Squadron's formation of specially modified B-25s. Approaching the Japanese transport vessel, Teomaru, at such low altitude, Lana's team was able to position their forward guns to silence the ship's anti-aircraft defenses. As the bombs were released from Lana's aircraft, they skipped twice across the water before hitting their target, the hull at the register where it met the water just beneath the waterline. Struck with lethal accuracy, the 6,870 long-ton transport fractionally disintegrated into halves that sank within minutes amid a roaring inferno. As the minutes ticked by, the attack's rapid progression continued. By 15 minutes after the initial strike, all 7 of the targeted transports had been hit, with some already beginning to sink. The destruction was uncontested, and even the vigilant destroyer escorts sustained heavy damage. In particular, the destroyer Shirayuki, serving as the flagship for Admiral Kim. The scene was a chaotic tableau of devastation in the aftermath of the intense naval engagement. The water, thick and oily from bunker fuel mixed with resin and debris, was littered with remnants of wrecked ships, broken dazzle of metal, splintered wood, and wreckage floating aimlessly in the turbulent sea. Thousands of men transformed into helpless victims churned the surf, not just from the ferocity of the battle, but from the treacherous conditions. Among the countless souls struggling to survive were sailors who could not swim, exhausted soldiers hanging onto broken pieces of wreckage in a futile hope of rescue, and wounded men desperately clutching at anything that might keep them afloat. Eyewitnesses and official reports in the days that followed conveyed grim estimates, suggesting that well more than 3,000 sailors and soldiers found themselves trapped in these hostile waters, fighting against despair and the elements alike. As the limbs and ships floated amidst the chaos, the 4 destroyers, a vital line of rescue, began their overburdened effort to pluck survivors from the deadly embrace of the sea. These vessels, Yukikaze, Asagumo, Uranami, and Shikanami, undaunted by the scale of the tragedy, embarked on relentless rescue operations, demonstrates of desperate heroism and resilience amidst chaos. Despite their efforts, the rescue ships could only bring casualties so far. Their capacities were limited, and soon the embedded threat of enemy air patrols loomed again. By around 1 in the afternoon on March the 3rd, the reprogrammed sight of Allied aircraft returning shifted the nature of the scene dramatically. This time, the aircraft approached with a different intent. Initial perceptions of relief swiftly twisting into dread. The survivors, staring upwards from their makeshift refuges, had once hoped the aircraft might simply be documenting the destruction, their postcards sent to distant allies. Yet this relief would quickly give way to horror. The planes descended to wave height and opened fire, unleashing a brutal strafing attack that added fresh layers of devastation to the already catastrophic scene. This action, highly controversial, was justified later by Allied commanders as a necessary measure to prevent Japanese forces from re-establishing themselves ashore or rejoining the ongoing conflict. The aircraft attacking included B-25 bombers, A-20 Havocs, and numerous fighters, all relentlessly making passes across the water, their powerful machine guns churning the surface into frothy plumes of spray and blood. From the American military perspective, these actions had a clear strategic purpose. Any enemy soldiers who managed to survive the horrible sinking now threatened to reinforce the Japanese military garrison at Leh, and preventing these reinforcements from reaching shore was deemed critically important. The dramatic and morally complex issue of strafing Japanese survivors in the water added a darker tone to the events, highlighting the brutal realities of warfare. From the perspective of the American military hierarchy, keeping the enemy from regrouping and replenishing their forces justified these harsh measures. Strikes aimed directly at fleeing combatants and survivors alike. With clear directives from General Kenny, no Japanese soldier was to be allowed safe passage. The orders were that none should reach New Guinea alive. This stance, however, was a stark departure from traditional samurai notions of honor in warfare, where enemy combatants, when defeated, were to be treated with dignity, regardless of the circumstances. The sharply contrasting Japanese ethos of Bushido, the code of the warrior, embraced principles of respect toward enemies, including the humane treatment of defeated foes. The harrowing reality for the drowning and injured Japanese soldiers, nonetheless, was that they were subjected to negotiably indiscriminate fire and violence that crushed these ideals altogether. Their experiences dispelled any remnants of the notion that there was honor in dying or suffering in foreign waters under such brutal terms. As nighttime descended on the 3rd of March, the chaos continued beneath a shadowy darkness. From pre-positioned flotillas loomed in the darkness, the American Navy dispatched their PT boats, small, fast, heavily armed torpedo craft, to continue their vicious hunt. Commanded by Lieutenant Commander Barry Atkins, these 10 swift vessels penetrated the treacherous waters just as darkness cloaked the sea, homing in on any motion of survivors with ruthless determination. As their searchlights swept back and forth across the surface, machine guns fired relentlessly, bringing waves of gunfire that pierced the night air. PT-43 and PT-150, in particular, located the severely damaged transport ship, Owa Maru, still afloat amidst the destruction, and launched torpedoes, striking the vessel and swiftly sinking it beneath the dark waters once and for all, dispersing more men into the surrounding chaos. For the Japanese who survived the initial sinking and later strafing, the night brought not relief but a series of new horrors. The sight and smell of blood attracted predators of the water. Sharks, drawn by the movement and scent of blood, began grabbing at the flailing bodies, turning the blood-bathed waters into a deadly battleground beneath the surface. During the chaotic and brutal culmination of the maritime confrontation, the battered Japanese forces were thrown into a frantic retreat, quickly disintegrating under the relentless assault. As the battle raged, Japanese sailors and soldiers desperately tried to cling to life, often clinging to rescued comrades or desperately attempting to reach the safety of nearby vessels or shorelines, while traps of fire and destruction marred their escape routes. Amidst this chaos, the American aircraft, acting based on urgent tactical imperatives combined with a desire for retribution, continued their relentless strafing campaigns, hitting not only enemy ships and vessels, but also, starkly, targeting the very life rafts and small boats where lone survivors floated helplessly in the vast sea. This aggressive, uncompromising atmosphere was rooted in both military necessity and a determined attitude of vengeance. According to James Duffy's detailed account in his book titled War at the End of the World, there was a particularly notorious incident involving a B-17 bomber nicknamed the Double Trouble, commanded by Lieutenant Woodrow W. Moore. During a critical moment, the Double Trouble collided mid-air with a Zero fighter, an act which exemplified the chaos and deadly stakes. At approximately the same time, 7 crew members parachuted from the bomber, aiming to escape the fierce aerial combat. Tragically, the attacking Japanese Zero fighters, instead of simply neutralizing the parachuting crew for strategic reasons, gunned down these helpless men as they floated down, weighed by their parachutes, an event witnessed by other American bomber crews overhead. The brutality of this incident ignited fierce anger among the American pilots. Such incidents were viewed by many as unnecessary and savage acts that intensified their resolve to inflict harsh penalties on Japanese forces, even if it meant violating certain norms of conventional warfare. American military leadership, including General Kenny, would later refer to these merciless attacks and volunteer missions as mopping up operations, a euphemism that glossed over the brutal reality of their actions, but which underscored the severity of the conduct indulged in during the pursuit. In the days following this fierce engagement, American and Australian airmen resumed their patrols, returning time and again to the same waters where the battles had unfolded. They patiently prowled the seas, relentlessly searching for any Japanese survivors clinging to life in lifeboats or on makeshift rafts, carefully scanning the turbulent waters for any sign of escape or rescue. In a transmission that remained classified at the time, an official report dated March the 20th, 1943, described these operations with stark honesty. The slaughter continued until nightfall. Should any survivors slip past our strafing aircraft, they found themselves at least 30 miles from land in waters notoriously infested by man-eating sharks. Meanwhile, pioneering Japanese submarines, specifically numbers 117 and 126, embarked on clandestine rescue missions. Striving to avoid the ever-present threat of American aircraft patrols overhead, these submarines methodically moved in and out of the waters, seeking to rescue stranded personnel. By March the 6th, 1943, the I-117 and I-126 had managed to surface and retrieve a total of 170 survivors in their carefully orchestrated effort. 2 days later, the submarine I-126 located another 54 individuals in the water and successfully brought them ashore at a place called Leh. The constraints of supplies and capacity meant the submarines could only rescue limited numbers at a time, leaving hundreds more stranded and exposed in the treacherous seas. These submarine crews, having endured the horrors of the battlefield, vividly recounted scenes of chaos and despair. Men calling out in utter darkness, survivors covered in oil, too weak even to climb aboard, and the heartbreaking dilemma faced by rescuers tasked with choosing whom to save. The staggering statistics from these incidents paint a grim picture. Of an estimated 6,900 troops desperately needed across the corridors of New Guinea, only approximately 1,200 managed to reach safety at Leh. Another roughly 2,700 were rescued later by destroyers and submarines and returned to the harbor at Rabaul. Yet the death toll on the Japanese side was significantly higher, with an estimated 3,000 soldiers and sailors killed in the process. As for the Americans, their losses had been comparatively minor, suffering only 4 aircraft and 13 airmen lost during these operations. The casualty ratio of approximately 230 to 1 in favor of the Allies truly captured the scale of this unusual yet decisive engagement, an amount unheard of in naval warfare, marking a pivotal shift in the dynamics of the campaign. This Battle of the Bismarck Sea is widely regarded as a definitive turning point in the Pacific theater of World War II. The overwhelming losses suffered by the Japanese proved so demoralizing and strategically damaging that they never again risked dispatching large convoys into waters controlled by American aircraft, effectively shutting off critical lines of reinforcement for Japanese forces. Going forward, Japan refrained from attempting surface convoy operations during World War II. The skies over the Pacific saw the emergence of a variety of aircraft and innovations that transformed aerial warfare into a more deadly and strategic endeavor. Among these developments, the heroics and ingenuity of certain key figures stand out, exemplifying the relentless drive to enhance combat capabilities. One such person was Major William Benn of the 63rd Squadron, part of the 43rd Bomb Group, which operated under the umbrella of the 5th Air Force of the United States Army Air Forces. Serving in the relentless theater of combat across the Southwest Pacific area, Major William Benn was instrumental in perfecting the aerial transports or in operational tactics that became vital for the logistical and combat success of Allied forces. His leadership and ingenuity in these areas helped orchestrate vital air maneuvers during a time when air power played a critical role in the broader Pacific campaign. Alongside this, another major figure, Major Paul "Pappy" Guns, became renowned for his work on aircraft modification that tailored planes into formidable flying battleships. Major Guns, who was stationed with the 90s Bomb Squadron in the 3rd Bomb Group, pioneered the development of a specialized strafer variant of the American light bomber aircraft, particularly the A-20 and the B-25 Mitchell. These adapted aircraft were equipped with an unprecedented armament of between 8 and 14 forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns, transforming them into almost unstoppable attack platforms. Their primary role was to preemptively and ferociously attack anti-aircraft artillery positions, maligned enemies that otherwise hindered aircraft maneuverability and strike capabilities. Once the enemy defenses were subdued and subdued quickly, these planes could then deliver bombs at extremely close range, crushing remaining resistance and providing crucial support for ground operations. This tactical versatility was a significant evolution in aircraft role specialization, contributing substantially to the Allies' air superiority during the intense island-hopping campaigns across the Pacific. Despite the bombing successes and destruction these aircraft could wreak during combat, the grim reality was that not all who fought and fell met their end in the skies. Many survivors, injured or overwhelmed, found themselves stranded in the vast expanses of open water after losing their aircraft in combat. In the chaos of these desperate battles, small groups of survivors often managed to reach nearby islands, initiating harrowing and often hopeless struggles for survival. The struggle was fierce, and survival was uncertain. Numbers dwindled, and hopes waned as each group faced its daunting fight amid unfamiliar terrain, healing wounds perhaps only to face new dangers. One particularly tragic episode involved a band of 18 survivors who managed to land on the island of Kerwina. Yet their ordeal was not over. Shortly after their arrival, they were captured by a patrol vessel, PT-114, underscoring the constant danger from both the enemy and the perilously unpredictable environment. Not far from there, another group managed a perilous journey to Guadalcanal, only to meet their end at the hands of an American patrol. The brutality of war often did not discriminate. All who became victims, whether injured or in disarray, faced potentially deadly consequences. Meanwhile, on Goodenough Island, Australian patrols led their own fierce campaign against remaining Japanese personnel. Between the 8th and 14th of March of the year 1943, Australian units from the 47th Infantry Battalion undertook a savage and effective campaign, finding and killing a total of 72 Japanese soldiers. In addition, they captured 42 prisoners and discovered another 9 Japanese soldiers who had been killed by other means, lying lifeless on a raft. This brutal and decisive action revealed the extent of the Allies' efforts to eliminate surviving enemy combatants and posed significant questions about the nature of wartime conduct. Particularly striking was the fact that the Japanese forces had been completely unaware of the tragic truth until after the war. They remained oblivious to the fact that their convoy had been truly doomed from its very inception. The Allies had, in fact, intercepted and decoded Japanese naval communication messages prior to the engagement. Code redders in both Melbourne, Australia, and Washington, D.C. One had successfully decrypted and analyzed the intercepted radio messages, gaining detailed intelligence about the convoy's intended destination, the specific route it would take, and the exact date of its arrival. Every critical element, such as the convoy's composition, naval escort, and timing, had been meticulously uncovered before the Japanese even set sail. This all-consuming meticulous intelligence allowed the Allies to famously set a trap, one that the Japanese believed was unbreakable due to their overconfidence in their secret communications. The Japanese, particularly those who adhered to the Bushido Code, a traditional set of principles emphasizing honor, loyalty, and dignity, had perceived their naval and air defenses as invulnerable due to their peerless code, which prized the dignity of combat and the respect for enemies. Therefore, they had transported their convoy into a meticulously prepared ambush, sailing into a strategically devised trap designed by Allied intelligence specialists. In the tragic aftermath of this event, the massacre at the Bismarck Sea emerged as a stark in the naval conflict that unfolded in the Bismarck Sea, a fierce engagement occurring many miles away from major Allied bases, carried profound strategic implications. Its proximity to vital supply routes meant that a significant number of vessels and personnel could be within striking distance of land, thereby influencing operational approaches on both sides. The devastating destruction wrought during this battle prompted a complete overhaul of Japanese military strategy, forcing imperial commanders to reevaluate their tactics and assumptions. Recognizing the realities of modern warfare, Admiral Minichi Koga, who took over as commander-in-chief after Admiral Yamamoto, acknowledged a harsh truth. Surface ships could no longer be relied upon to survive in waters where aircraft held uncontested dominance. This drove a strategic shift, resulting in the effective abandonment of critical territories like New Guinea, which had suddenly become indefensible in the face of superior air power. The psychological effects of the battle rippled deeply through Japanese forces as the losses and impending threats at sea took a toll on morale and resolve. Troops and ships scheduled for transportation began experiencing alarming and unprecedented rates of desertion. The threat of being unexpectedly caught and overwhelmed by American aircraft, often capable of striking from afar with devastating precision, fostered a climate of fear that far exceeded the dangers of actual combat. For the Allied forces, the engagement demonstrated conclusively that air superiority alone could decisively defeat naval forces, marking a pivotal transformation in naval warfare theory. Land-based aircraft, when adequately equipped and tactically trained, found themselves capable of dominating key sea lanes without the need for traditional carriers, thus redefining strategic principles in a theater where ships and carriers had once been the backbone of naval dominance. This critical lesson from the Battle of the Bismarck Sea would resonate throughout the remainder of the Pacific theater, influencing subsequent military strategies among Allied commanders. The crucible of this engagement proved that the age-old naval doctrines had to be fundamentally rethought in light of emerging airborne technology. After the war concluded, a quiet debate emerged over the legality of strafing enemy personnel and survivors, whether such tactics amounted to war crimes. Ultimately, no formal prosecution ensued, as the official American position maintained that these were enemy combatants capable of reaching land and continuing the fight. The absence of legal action, despite Japanese officers being executed for similar acts earlier, was often viewed as a reflection of what might be called victor's justice, where the victor's standards took precedence over uniform legal principles. Both sides had crossed ethically ambiguous lines during this harrowing conflict, but only the defeated paid the price in court, a stark illustration of how justice in war is often imbalanced. Historians now recognize the Battle of the Bismarck Sea as a turning point in the evolution of aerial warfare. The statistics alone provide a reprise of the battle's severity. All 8 Japanese transports were sunk, 4 destroyers destroyed, and approximately 3,000 Japanese soldiers and sailors killed. In comparison, only about 13 Allied airmen lost their lives. But beyond pure numbers, the significance of this engagement extended toward the dramatic transformation of warfare itself onto a modern battlefield dominated by technological supremacy. The combination of advanced technology and superior intelligence had produced casualty ratios that resembled mass destruction, underscoring the deadly efficiency of modern aerial tactics. The image of aircraft methodically strafing and destroying helpless crews became a stark symbol of the Pacific War's relentless, merciless character. The outcome led General Douglas MacArthur to capacity the battle as the decisive aerial encounter of the entire Southwest Pacific theater. His assessment proved prescient. Japan would never recapture the strategic initiative in New Guinea, and the value of air power had been conclusively demonstrated. It became clear that modern war had transcended classical notions of direct combat between armed forces. Aerial bombardment and interdiction, paired with cutting-edge intelligence and technological innovation, could bring about destructive levels of annihilation rather than merely tactical victories. For Japan, this battle marked the commencement of a decisive decline in their strategic capabilities within the Pacific. Their inability to reinforce and supply distant garrisons, autonomous from Allied air coverage, condemned their forces to isolation, gradually unraveling their presence in the region until eventual destruction was unavoidable. Meanwhile, for the American military, the engagement reflected their metamorphosis from victims of the surprise attack at Pearl Harbor into practitioners of the ruthless, methodical destruction of their enemies. The same nation that had been decimated by a sudden aerial assault had, over the course of the war, grown capable of systematically annihilating thousands of enemy personnel and ships, an uncomfortable ethical reality that sparks ongoing debate. This controversy surrounding the morality of strafing survivors and taking aggressive measures illustrates the complex moral landscape that Nazi-like war tactics engender. The fighting in the Bismarck Sea encapsulated a brutal collision between the demands of military necessity and the constraints of humanitarian law, vividly portrayed in the oil-slicked waters and shattered vessels. Both sides learned painfully that in a total war, traditional boundaries often disintegrate as violence and brutality become the norm. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea stands not merely as an episode of strategic importance, but as a stark demonstration among the most decisive and fiercely debated battles of World War II, lies the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, a confrontation that showcased the extraordinary capabilities of air power and its profound strategic and moral implications. Over the span of just 3 days, Allied forces, comprising formidable American and Australian air fleets, executed a relentless assault that led to the complete destruction of a substantial Japanese convoy. This meticulous and almost surgical campaign resulted in the loss of thousands of Japanese lives and effectively sealed the fate of any hopes Japan might have harbored regarding the reinforcement of their forces in New Guinea by sea. The aftermath of this brutal engagement left deeply scarred survivors on both sides, but it was the Japanese sailors who bore the most visible and enduring psychological wounds. As they watched helplessly from the water, desperate men subjected to strafing runs by American aircraft, they experienced a trauma that would haunt them long after the event had passed. Many survivors would carry the mental scars of witnessing what they described as the relentless, almost savage brutality inflicted upon their comrades. These chilling experiences shattered any remaining illusions the Japanese may have had about American military weakness or the limits of modern warfare's savagery. Beyond its immediate tactical success, the legacy of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea resonated in other vital areas. It vividly demonstrated how air dominance could decisively control sea lanes, a revelation that reshaped naval and aerial strategies worldwide. Moreover, it underscored the critical importance of intelligence and technological advantage in modern combat, offering a harsh reminder of how precise information and cutting-edge technology could tilt the outcome of a campaign with ruthless efficiency. However, perhaps most troubling was the episode's moral ambiguity. The sight of aircraft systematically targeting and destroying waterborne survivors was, and remains, one of the most disturbing images of the Pacific War. It starkly confronted the world with the brutal realities of total war, where the lines between combatant and non-combatant often blurred in the inferno of conflict. In the grim chronicles of those 3 days, roughly 3,000 Japanese soldiers perished, not in what might be considered glorious, valiant combat, but in a carefully orchestrated slaughter that exemplified modern warfare's writing of conscience. The destroyed convoy, losing its men by the thousands in a calculated murder, rather than an honorable battle, marked a turning point in military engagement during the conflict. The Japanese witnesses who survived these events returned to their homeland, bearing harrowing stories that would fuel the perception of American ruthlessness. This narrative of relentless brutality would deeply influence Japanese military psyche for the duration of the war, casting a shadow over their fighting spirit and shaping their expectations of the enemies they faced. The significance of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea extends far beyond its immediate tactical victories. It proved conclusively that technological and aerial supremacy could deliver wholesale destruction in modern combat, a lesson learned quickly and brutally by the Japanese. They were stunned to realize that their adversaries had evolved beyond traditional notions of warfare, capable not just of swift assaults, but of gleaning victory through ruthless efficiency and unwavering resolve. The Americans' willingness to inflict such devastation without mercy underscored a harsh transformation in wartime morality, steering the conflict into new, darker territory. This brutal lesson, carved into the collective memory through blood and terror during those perilous days in March of the year 1943, would shape the escalation of brutality throughout the Pacific theater. The conflict's savage tendencies intensified over the ensuing years, culminating only at the nuclear dawn that brought the war to an end. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea remained a stark symbol of the destructive capacity of modern aerial warfare, reminding all involved that even in the quest for victory, human morality could often be left behind in the smoke and chaos of combat.